What would make a future queen ignore a phone call? Not just once, but over and over again. What would drive Kate Middleton, the woman who has built her public image on grace, patience, and composure, to cut Meghan Markle off mid-dial, as if the sound of her voice was simply too much to bear? Imagine the scene. Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, clinging to her phone late at night, redialing again and again, begging for something she believed was rightfully hers, or at least something that could save her image. Not money, not status, not even sympathy. A tiara. Yes, a glittering royal crown jewel. But not just any tiara. A tiara that symbolized legitimacy, belonging, and power. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Right from the beginning, the stakes in this story are higher than most people realize. This isn't about jewels and diamonds. It's about status, survival, and humiliation. Meghan Markle had everything to gain from wearing one of the royal family's most prized possessions. And Kate Middleton? She had everything to lose if she allowed it. So, what do you do when your sister-in-law keeps calling, keeps pushing, keeps begging, while you're expected to stand firm as the next queen-in-waiting? Do you give in? Or do you draw the line? Kate drew her line, and she drew it hard. Now, before we dive headlong into this messy drama, ask yourself, why does this story matter right now? Why should anyone care about a royal tiara, of all things? Because behind the sparkle of diamonds lies a truth about the monarchy that most people never see. The tiara represents more than fashion. It's a weapon of hierarchy, a silent statement that says, I belong here, and you don't. And in the battle between Kate and Meghan, the tiara became the ultimate prize in a war over legitimacy, loyalty, and recognition. But let's step back. Because you can't understand the explosive tension of those ignored phone calls without understanding what came before them. Meghan Markle wasn't just a duchess trying to make a fashion statement. She was a woman under fire, desperate, cornered, and increasingly alienated from the family she thought would make her a queen. The press was against her. Hollywood was watching her every move. And inside the palace walls, whispers grew louder. She didn't belong. She wasn't fit. She wasn't royal enough. What do people do when they feel their backs are against the wall? They reach for symbols of power. And in Meghan's case, that symbol was a tiara. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about borrowing a jewel. This was about rewriting her story. A tiara could transform her from outsider duchess to a woman who looked like she belonged at the very heart of royalty. Think about it. One photograph, one appearance, one dazzling tiara on her head. Suddenly Meghan wouldn't look like the Hollywood actress clinging to a title. She'd look like an equal to Kate Middleton. And that, perhaps, was the real problem. Because Kate Middleton had spent years earning her position. Years of silence, smiles, waiting in the wings, and carefully crafting her image as the dutiful wife of a future king. Meghan, on the other hand, wanted shortcuts. At least, that's how it looked from the inside. To the family, Meghan's desperate calls were not just requests. They were demands. They were challenges to the very hierarchy that kept the monarchy standing. So when Meghan picked up the phone and dialed again and again, Kate didn't just hear a sister-in-law asking for help. She heard a threat. She heard the undertone. If you don't give me what I want, I will find a way to take it. And that's when the silent war began. But let's pause and ask, who was really right here? Was Meghan justified in wanting what she believed was hers? Or was Kate right to slam the doors shut and cut off communication? You see, this is where the story splits in two. Supporters of Meghan will say she was simply trying to level the playing field, to have access to what any royal wife should have access to. After all, tiaras had been loaned before. Why not to her? But Kate's defenders will argue that this wasn't about fairness. It was about discipline, tradition, and control. The monarchy cannot survive if everyone gets what they want. And Kate, as the guardian of tradition, couldn't risk letting Meghan bend the rules. And yet, as fascinating as the arguments are, they don't explain the human drama of those calls. Imagine Meghan on one end of the line, pacing back and forth, her voice tight with urgency. Kate, please, I just need it for one event. Just one event. And imagine Kate, her jaw set, glancing at the phone on her nightstand, refusing to pick up, determined not to give an inch. How many times did Meghan try? How many voicemails were left? Only to vanish into the void of silence. Each ignored call wasn't just a rejection. It was a message, You are not welcome. You are not trusted. You are not equal. And yet, Meghan kept trying. That's the part that leaves people stunned. Why keep calling if the answer was no? Because when desperation sets in, people don't stop. They cling harder. They hope that persistence will break resistance. And Meghan, driven by the fear of being sidelined, believed that if she just kept pressing, Kate would eventually give in. But Kate didn't. And that's what makes this story so powerful. Because it wasn't just Kate ignoring the phone. It was Kate sending a message to Meghan, to the family, and to the entire world. You can call me all you like, but I will not hand over the crown jewels of legitimacy. Think about that. The tiara wasn't even Kate's to give. The jewels belonged to the crown. Yet in that moment, Kate became the gatekeeper. Kate became the wall Meghan couldn't scale. And that wall grew taller every time the phone went unanswered. But here's where things get even more fascinating. Meghan's calls weren't happening in a vacuum. Rumors began swirling around the palace staff. Word spread that Meghan was obsessed with getting her hands on a tiara, that she was demanding access, that she was begging in ways unbecoming of a duchess. And you know how gossip works. It spreads. It twists. It grows. Soon, it wasn't just Meghan calling Kate. It was Meghan embarrassing herself. It was Meghan lowering her dignity. And for Kate, that embarrassment only confirmed what she already believed. This was not a woman to be trusted with royal jewels. Now ask yourself, how would you react if your sister-in-law kept calling, begging for something that you knew would only spark chaos? Would you give in to keep the peace? Or would you draw the line, knowing that giving in would only make things worse later? Kate chose the latter, and it left Meghan in a position she despised, powerless, humiliated, ignored. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because when Meghan realized Kate wouldn't answer the phone, she didn't just stop trying. No, she escalated. She found new ways to push, to maneuver, to demand. And that escalation? That's what turned a private feud into a royal scandal. But that's not the shocking part. The real shock came when Meghan, in one final attempt, picked up the phone one last time. Her voice, by now, carried not just desperation but defiance. And Kate's response, or rather, her lack of response, would set into motion a series of events that changed everything. Because that was the moment Meghan realized she was not just asking for a tiara. She was declaring war. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What makes someone risk humiliation, rejection, and scandal, all for a crown they might never truly own? Why would Meghan Markle fixate so intensely on a piece of jewelry, dialing Kate Middleton's number until the silence on the other end cut sharper than any blade? It wasn't just about wanting to wear diamonds. It wasn't about looking pretty in front of flashing cameras. No, this was about something deeper, something primal, recognition. Because for Meghan, the tiara wasn't just a royal accessory. It was her golden ticket, her passport into the heart of an institution that had always treated her as an outsider. Think about it. Tiaras have long been more than ornaments in the British monarchy. They are power statements. Each tiara tells a story. Some are wedding gifts. Some were passed down from queen to queen. Each stone carries a history, a legacy, a whisper of authority that stretches across centuries. When a royal woman steps out in a tiara, she is not just wearing jewels. She is draped in centuries of legitimacy. She is saying, I belong here. I am untouchable. So imagine being Meghan, the actress turned Duchess, the outsider who had already been accused of breaking tradition, defying protocol, and skipping the years of silent waiting that Kate endured. Meghan didn't just want a tiara. She needed it. It was proof. Proof to the world that she was no longer the girl from Hollywood, no longer the American outsider, no longer just Harry's wife. With a tiara sparkling on her head, she could silence the whispers that haunted her every step. But here's the contradiction that makes this story so fascinating. Meghan, the modern woman who had once claimed she wanted to change the monarchy, now clung desperately to its most archaic symbols. Didn't she once suggest that titles and jewels didn't matter? Didn't she once act as though she was above the royal trappings? Yet when the spotlight dimmed, when her relevance was questioned, she reached for the one thing she had insisted she didn't care about: a tiara. Why? Because image matters. More than she ever admitted. Ask yourself, how often do people say they don't care about something, only to crave it more than anything else when it's out of reach? Meghan told the world she wasn't obsessed with crowns. And yet, in private, the obsession consumed her. This obsession didn't come out of nowhere. Let's rewind. When Meghan first married Harry, the tiara drama began on their wedding day. Remember the Queen's decision to deny Meghan her choice of tiara? Meghan wanted the dazzling emerald one. The Queen said no. Instead, she was handed a different tiara, a compromise. And that wound never healed. Meghan carried it like a scar. To Meghan, that no wasn't about a piece of jewelry. It was about power. It was about being told, you don't get to choose. You don't belong in this circle of authority. And from that moment on, the tiara became her battleground. So years later, when Meghan tried to borrow a tiara again, it wasn't just about accessorizing. It was about rewriting history. It was about reclaiming the no she had been forced to accept. This time, she thought she would win. But there was one person standing in her way. Kate Middleton. Kate, who had quietly earned her place through patience, silence, and years of endurance. Kate, who had been granted tiaras not as shortcuts, but as rewards. Kate, who knew that if Meghan were handed one of those sparkling symbols without discipline or respect, it would shake the very foundations of tradition. And so Kate refused. Now, think about the irony. Meghan wanted the tiara to elevate herself to Kate's level. But by asking, by begging, by calling again and again, she only widened the gap. Instead of looking powerful, she looked desperate. Instead of looking equal, she looked diminished. And the cruelest part? Meghan knew it. Every ignored call was a reminder that she wasn't being taken seriously. Every voicemail lost in silence was another nail in the coffin of her image as a modern royal equal. Can you feel the humiliation? Can you feel the sting? But humiliation has a way of breeding obsession. The more Kate ignored her, the more Meghan wanted it. It's like the forbidden fruit. The harder it is to reach, the more you crave it. And Meghan's craving turned into something bigger than personal desire. It became a mission. She wanted that tiara not just for herself, but as a weapon. She wanted to wear it in public, at a high-profile event, so that cameras would capture the image and beam it across the globe. One photograph could do what months of press releases and interviews could not. Force the world to see her as untouchable. And more importantly, it would send a message to Kate. I can play your game. I can look like you. I can even outshine you. But here lies the tragedy. Because while Meghan saw the tiara as her ticket to legitimacy, Kate saw the request as a threat. A direct attack. Meghan believed she was asking for equality. Kate believed Meghan was trying to leapfrog her way into a status she had not earned. And when two women view the same object with such different meanings, you can guarantee the sparks will fly. Let's pause and ask, do you think Meghan was wrong to want it? Or was Kate wrong to deny her? Because, on the surface, Meghan's request seems harmless. After all, what's the harm in lending a tiara? But the monarchy isn't built on harmless gestures. It's built on hierarchy. Every gesture has meaning. Every decision has weight. For Kate to hand over a tiara, to let Meghan parade it in public, would have been to cede ground in a battle for respect and legitimacy. And Kate wasn't about to do that. But Meghan couldn't see it that way. She only saw rejection. And rejection fuels anger. So the phone calls continued. The pleas grew sharper. The desperation more obvious. And all the while, Kate's silence grew louder. Yet here's the twist. Meghan wasn't just battling Kate. She was battling the entire system. Because behind Kate's refusal lay the weight of tradition, the whispers of palace aides, the subtle nods from Charles and William. Kate might have been the voice saying no, but she wasn't the only one who believed Meghan should be denied. And that realization, that the entire system stood against her, was what drove Meghan over the edge. Because once Meghan realized she couldn't get the tiara by asking, she began considering other ways. And what she tried next would not only shock Kate, but would leave the entire palace whispering in disbelief. Can you picture it? The palace hall's quiet, Kensington Gardens dark under the London sky, the royal apartments still, except for one sound. A phone vibrating on the nightstand. Again, and again, and again. It was late. Too late for ordinary calls. Too late for friendly chats. Yet Meghan Markle's name flashed across the screen, relentless, insistent, impossible to ignore. Why would she do it? Why would Meghan, who prided herself on poise and control, call Kate Middleton in the dead of night, over and over again, risking not only embarrassment but fury? Because desperation doesn't tell time. When you're cornered, when you feel your last chance slipping away, 2 a.m. feels no different from 2 p.m. All that matters is getting through. And Meghan believed, perhaps naively, perhaps arrogantly, that persistence could crack the palace walls. Now, let's pause for a second. Put yourself in Kate's shoes. Imagine the phone buzzing past midnight, disturbing the peace, disrupting her calm. A duchess should never have to deal with that. A future queen should not be reduced to dodging phone calls like a teenager avoiding drama. And yet, there Kate was, staring at the glowing screen, letting it ring, refusing to pick up. The first time, she might have thought, I'll deal with this tomorrow. The second time, she probably sighed and turned the phone face down. By the third, fourth, fifth attempt, her patience wasn't just thin. It was gone. And still Meghan kept calling. What did those calls sound like? We may never hear the recordings, but palace insiders have painted the picture. Meghan's tone was urgent. Her words rushed, breathless. She needed the tiara. She needed permission. She needed Kate to unlock the gate she couldn't pass through. And when Kate didn't answer, the voicemails piled up. Pleading messages. Emotional appeals. Each one more frantic than the last. Kate, please, it's just for one event. Kate, you know how much this means. Kate, I'm begging you, just this once. Can you imagine Kate listening to those words, her jaw tightening with every syllable? Or perhaps she didn't even listen. Perhaps she deleted them without a second thought, knowing exactly where this was heading. But here's the twist. Kate wasn't the only one hearing about the calls. Staff knew. Assistants noticed. Word trickled through the palace corridors that Meghan was hounding Kate at all hours. What starts as a private plea quickly snowballs into a rumor. And rumors inside the palace? They're deadly. Because once the whispers began, Meghan's image wasn't just that of a duchess asking for a favor. She became the woman who begged. The duchess who called and called, who refused to take no for an answer. And in an institution obsessed with dignity and composure, that label was poison. Let's ask the question that nags at every corner of this story. Was Meghan truly begging? Or was she simply determined? Because to her supporters, these late-night calls could be framed differently. They weren't desperation, they were persistence. They weren't humiliating, they were proof of how much the system resisted her. Why shouldn't she have what Kate had? Why shouldn't she demand the same? They might argue. But to Kate, and to the wider royal machine, the calls crossed a line. Royals don't beg. Royals don't chase. Royals certainly don't phone each other after midnight in a frenzy over jewels. Every unanswered ring was more than silence. It was Kate drawing her boundaries. It was Kate saying, I don't play by your rules, Meghan, and I won't be bullied into bending tradition. But Meghan didn't see it that way. In her mind, the silence was cruelty, rejection, proof that she was alone, unwelcome, shunned. And rejection only fed her fire. Picture the scene again. Meghan in California or Frogmore Cottage, pacing her room, clutching the phone tighter each time. Each buzz, each voicemail, an attempt to claw her way back into relevance. Maybe Harry was beside her, torn between loyalty to his wife and dread of pushing his brother's wife too far. Maybe he told her to stop. Maybe she ignored him. Because for Meghan, stopping meant surrender. And she wasn't ready to surrender. Now, imagine Kate's side of this silent war. She wasn't only thinking of herself. She was thinking of William, of the crown, of the monarchy itself. To give Meghan what she wanted would set a precedent. It would say, if you push hard enough, you'll get it. And Kate knew she couldn't allow that. Not when her entire role was built on discipline, restraint, and silence. This wasn't just a personal refusal. It was a royal stance. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because Kate's silence didn't stop the calls, it inflamed them. Meghan's tone shifted. What began as pleading slowly turned sharper. The messages less soft, more demanding. Less please, and more why won't you? The voice of a woman who felt betrayed, abandoned, maybe even mocked. And then, the breaking point. One night, Meghan dialed again. Maybe she believed Kate would finally give in. Maybe she thought that persistence had cracked the wall. But this time, Kate didn't just ignore the call. She blocked it. Think about that. A future queen blocking the Duchess of Sussex's number. The symbolism is staggering. That wasn't just a rejection. That was exile. That was Kate saying, enough. I will not be harassed. I will not be cornered. And I will not hand you the crown jewels of legitimacy. And what happened after that? Meghan's call stopped, for a moment. But silence didn't mean peace. Because once Meghan realized Kate had cut her off completely, her desperation took another shape. If she couldn't reach Kate by phone, she would find another way. And what Meghan tried next would drag William directly into the feud, forcing him to take sides in a battle that was no longer just between two duchesses. What happens when silence isn't enough? What happens when cutting off calls doesn't end the chaos, but only fuels it? For Kate Middleton, the late-night buzzing had stopped, yes. But in its place, something heavier lingered. Resentment. A slow-burning frustration that settled deep, not just with Meghan Markle's behavior, but with everything she represented. Why? Because for Kate, Meghan's obsession with the tiara was never about the tiara. It was about disrespect. It was about a challenge to everything Kate had endured, sacrificed, and earned. Let's ask the question, how would you feel if someone walked into your world, skipped the years of patience you had endured, and then demanded to share in the rewards you had bled for in silence? Would you see it as ambition? Or as entitlement? Kate saw entitlement. Remember, Kate had been in the royal spotlight for over a decade by the time Meghan entered the stage. She had been mocked as Weighty Katie, criticized for waiting years for William's proposal, judged for her middle-class roots, ridiculed by the press for her clothes, her posture, even her smile. But she endured it. Quietly, patiently. She built her image not by demanding respect, but by surviving humiliation. And when she was finally accepted, when she was finally crowned in the court of public opinion as a true royal, she wore her legitimacy like armor. So, imagine how she felt watching Meghan try to leapfrog her way into the same legitimacy with a single tiara. It wasn't fair. It wasn't earned. And it cut deep. Now, here's the contradiction that stung Kate the most. Meghan claimed to want freedom from the monarchy's trappings, claimed she wasn't interested in jewels, titles, or restrictions. Yet here she was, begging for the very symbol of submission to tradition, a tiara. For Kate, this wasn't just hypocrisy. It was manipulation. Meghan wanted the benefits of royalty without the burdens. And Kate resented it with every fiber of her being. Think about that resentment simmering in silence. Kate wasn't one to shout, wasn't one to lash out. Her weapon was composure. Her shield was her smile. But inside, she kept score. Every ignored call, every rumor of Meghan's desperation, every whisper from staff who rolled their eyes at Meghan's antics, it all fed into Kate's quiet storm. And William saw it. Insiders claim William was livid over Meghan's late-night harassment. But more than that, he saw how it affected Kate. This wasn't just about jewels anymore. It was about dignity. About the woman he loved being disrespected by his brother's wife. And for William, that was a line Meghan couldn't cross without consequences. But let's focus on Kate. Because resentment doesn't just live in the moment, it grows roots. Meghan's demands weren't happening in isolation. They came on the back of years of friction. Meghan had already undermined Kate in the press with claims of coldness. She had already hinted that Kate wasn't supportive, wasn't welcoming. And then came the bridesmaid dress fiasco. Tears, leaks, contradictions, all swirling around who made whom cry. For Kate, the tiara calls were just the latest chapter in a pattern of disrespect. Ask yourself, at what point does patience run out? At what point does a woman known for her composure decide enough is enough? Kate wasn't just angry at Meghan. She was angry at the idea that Meghan thought she could use her, push her, manipulate her, and get away with it. And the more Meghan pushed, the more Kate dug in her heels. That resentment hardened into resolve. Here's the irony. Meghan thought persistence would wear Kate down. But the opposite happened. Every call, every plea, every rumor only strengthened Kate's resolve to shut the door. Meghan wanted a tiara? Kate would make sure she never got close. But here's the twist. That resentment didn't just shape Kate's private attitude. It began to shape the palace's public stance. Because when Kate resented someone, she didn't lash out. She froze them out. Silent, controlled, impeccable. And when the public saw Kate silent and dignified, while Meghan appeared desperate and erratic, who do you think they sided with? The resentment-fueled and image-war Meghan could never win. Kate didn't need to speak. She didn't need to defend herself. She only needed to remain silent while Meghan's desperation painted the picture for her. And yet, resentment has consequences. Because while Kate stayed silent, Meghan grew louder. The more Kate ignored, the more Meghan escalated. And the cycle fed itself like fire and oxygen. But let's dig deeper. Why did Kate care so much? Why didn't she just shrug and laugh off Meghan's demands? Because for Kate, this wasn't just about Meghan. It was about the future crown. Every gesture, every decision Kate made was weighed against her destiny as queen. She couldn't risk looking weak. She couldn't risk giving in to Meghan and then being seen as someone who bent tradition for convenience. If she handed Meghan a tiara, she would be handing her legitimacy. And Kate wasn't about to hand Meghan the one thing she had worked for years to build. Now let me ask you, do you think this resentment was personal? Or was it duty? Did Kate genuinely dislike Meghan? Or was she simply protecting the crown? Because the answer might be both. And this dual motive, personal anger mixed with royal duty, made Kate's stance unshakable. Meghan wasn't just up against a sister-in-law. She was up against the embodiment of tradition itself. But Meghan didn't see it. She thought Kate was being spiteful. She thought Kate was punishing her. And so she grew bolder. She found new ways to push, new ways to try to break through Kate's icy wall. And here's where the resentment turned into something bigger. Kate wasn't just ignoring Meghan anymore. She was strategizing. She was preparing. She was ensuring that Meghan's desperation would not only fail, but would backfire. And when Meghan's next move came, it did backfire. Spectacularly. Because her obsession with getting what Kate refused to give would draw in someone Meghan hadn't counted on. Someone who wouldn't be as patient or as silent as Kate. William. And when William stepped in, the feud exploded into a battle no one in the palace could ignore. What happens when silence turns into strategy? When the unanswered calls and frozen smiles aren't just rejections, but a deliberate wall built to trap you outside. For Meghan Markle, this was the unbearable reality. Kate Middleton wasn't just ignoring her. She was shutting her down, cutting her off, making her look desperate. And that desperation? It began to show. Ask yourself, have you ever wanted something so badly that every no made you want it even more? That's where Meghan was. Each time Kate refused, Meghan didn't retreat. She pressed harder. She schemed more. She plotted new ways to get her hands on the tiara she believed was her ticket back to relevance. But here's the contradiction that makes this story sting. Meghan had always presented herself as confident, independent, and above the petty games of monarchy. Yet behind closed doors, her facade was cracking. The image of the strong Duchess who didn't need the royals was slipping. What emerged instead was a woman clawing for acceptance, a woman terrified of being sidelined. And the palace saw it. Staff whispered about Meghan's obsession. Advisors rolled their eyes at her persistence. Even Harry's friends began to murmur. Why is she so fixated on a tiara? The humiliation wasn't in being denied. The humiliation was in being seen as someone who couldn't let it go. But Meghan couldn't let it go. Because the tiara wasn't just a jewel. It was her salvation. Let's break it down. Meghan knew the power of imagery. She had worked in Hollywood. She understood that one photograph could tell a story words never could. She didn't just want the tiara for herself. She wanted it for the cameras. Imagine the headlines. Duchess Meghan stuns in royal tiara. That single image would silence critics, reframe her narrative, and elevate her to Kate's level in the public eye. But without the tiara, Meghan knew the opposite would happen. Every event she attended without one, every comparison to Kate glimmering in diamonds, only widened the gap. She didn't look royal. She looked less. And in Meghan's world, looking less was not an option. So, she doubled down. Behind the palace doors, Meghan's pleas turned into what insiders described as tantrums. Tears, anger, frustration. At one point, she allegedly told Harry, "If they don't let me have this, they'll never see me as one of them." Imagine that. One tiara representing her entire sense of belonging. Harry, torn as ever, tried to soothe her. But Meghan's desperation wasn't just about her feelings. It was about power. She began framing it as an issue of equality. Why does Kate get access and I don't? Why am I treated differently? And the more she asked, the more she exposed the truth. Meghan believed she deserved to skip the waiting, the earning, the quiet submission Kate had endured. But here's the irony. Every time Meghan pushed harder, every time she tried to force her way in, she only confirmed what the royals feared most, that she didn't understand the discipline behind the jewels, that she wasn't ready, wasn't trustworthy, wasn't truly royal. Do you see the trap? Meghan's desperation to prove she belonged only proved that she didn't. Now, Let's talk about the palace's reaction. The calls had already been cut off. Kate's silence was absolute. William was furious, protective, unwilling to let Meghan humiliate his wife. And Charles? He was watching, quiet, calculating, waiting. But the staff, the people who leaked, whispered, and gossiped, were the real fuel. They painted Meghan's desperation in the darkest possible light. They told stories of her begging, of her crying, of her demanding, and every leak fed the press. Soon, Meghan's private struggle became public humiliation. The headlines weren't about tiaras anymore. They were about her being difficult, about her being entitled, about her being desperate. Can you imagine the rage? The humiliation? The realization that not only had Kate denied her, but now the world was laughing? But Meghan wasn't finished. No, because if she couldn't break through Kate, she would find another path. She began sending messages, letters, notes, emails, direct appeals. If Kate wouldn't answer, Meghan would keep her words flowing through any channel she could find. And here's the chilling part. At least one of those messages didn't just vanish. It didn't just go ignored. It got forwarded, straight up the chain, to William, to Charles, maybe even further. Think about that. Meghan thought she was reaching Kate in private. In reality, her words were being passed around at the highest levels of the family she was trying to impress. Her desperation wasn't just visible. It was on display for the royals to judge, to mock, to use as ammunition. And that changed everything. Because once her desperation became royal gossip, the palace stopped seeing her as a nuisance and started seeing her as a liability. A duchess who couldn't control her emotions. A duchess who might break under the pressure. A duchess who, in their eyes, didn't deserve the crown jewels of legitimacy. But Meghan didn't know how much was already stacked against her. She still believed persistence could pay off. She still thought she could force the palace to bend. And so she pushed harder, until William stepped in. Because once Meghan's desperation reached his ears, he decided enough was enough. He wasn't going to let his wife be dragged into late-night dramas, wasn't going to let Meghan humiliate Kate any further. And what William did next would ignite a confrontation that shook the palace corridors and left Meghan more isolated than ever. What happens when the future king of England decides he's had enough? When William, usually composed and careful with his words, finally steps into the feud that's been simmering between his wife and his brother's wife. That's the moment everything changes. Because up until now, this was a battle of silence. Kate refusing to answer calls, Meghan refusing to stop making them. A quiet war of wills. But when William stepped in, silence turned into confrontation. Imagine William late at night, hearing from Kate that Meghan had been calling again, hearing from aides that Meghan had sent yet another pleading message, another desperate email. Imagine his frustration building, not just as a future king, but as a husband. Kate wasn't just the Duchess of Cambridge. She was the woman he had vowed to protect. And in his eyes, Meghan wasn't just disrespecting the monarchy. She was harassing his wife. How long could he stay silent? How long could he allow Meghan to chip away at Kate's dignity? The breaking point came when one of Meghan's messages, intended for Kate, landed on William's desk. Forwarded, highlighted, passed along by palace aides who wanted him to see what was happening. And when William read it, something snapped. Sources say William's anger was sharp, direct, impossible to contain. He was furious, not just at Meghan, but at Harry. How could his own brother allow this? How could Harry sit by while Meghan dragged Kate through late-night dramas, desperate pleas, humiliating demands? So William did what he had to do. He called Harry. Picture that conversation. Two brothers on the phone, but this wasn't the easy camaraderie of their youth. This was strained, tense, explosive. William's voice sharp, Harry's defensive. William demanding, "Tell her to stop. This isn't how we do things. She's embarrassing herself. She's humiliating Kate." And Harry, torn as always, trying to defend his wife, trying to explain that Meghan wasn't begging. She was asking, pushing, fighting for fairness. But William wasn't buying it. To him, Meghan's behavior was indefensible. "She needs to learn boundaries," he might have said. "And if you can't control this, then I will." Can you feel the tension? Two brothers, once inseparable, now divided by two women and a tiara. But let's pause and look at the irony. Meghan thought persistence would force Kate to bend. Instead, it forced William to rise. And William was far less forgiving than Kate's silence. Kate's strategy was to ignore. William's strategy was confrontation. And that confrontation widened the gulf not just between Kate and Meghan, but between William and Harry. Think about the personal stakes here. William had spent years protecting Kate from criticism, shielding her from the press, ensuring her dignity remained intact. To him, Meghan's late-night calls weren't just annoying. They were dangerous. Dangerous to Kate's mental well-being. Dangerous to the monarchy's image. Dangerous to the fragile balance of the brothers' relationship. So William dug in. He told Harry in no uncertain terms, Meghan would not be getting a tiara. Not now. Not ever. Not if it came through begging, demanding, or pushing. And the more Meghan asked, the more William hardened his stance. Now imagine Harry caught in the middle. His wife in tears, desperate, humiliated. His brother furious, unmovable, unwilling to show sympathy. What choice did Harry have? If he sided with William, he betrayed Meghan. If he sided with Meghan, he betrayed his brother. And deep down, Harry knew whichever choice he made would define the rest of his life. And Meghan? She wasn't about to back down. William's anger didn't scare her, it enraged her. She saw his intervention not as protection of Kate, but as an attack on herself. She began to frame it as bullying, as cruelty, as yet another example of the palace shutting her out. And in her eyes, William wasn't defending tradition. He was protecting Kate at Meghan's expense. So what do you do when the future king shuts the door in your face? Do you retreat? Do you accept defeat? Or do you push harder, even at the risk of burning every bridge left? Meghan chose to push. And that's when the palace corridors began to buzz with whispers of something even bigger. Whispers that Meghan, denied access to the jewels, had begun to plan a public retaliation. Something that would strike not just at Kate, but at William himself. Because if she couldn't get legitimacy through the crown jewels, she would try to tear down the people who denied her. And that was the moment this feud stopped being private. Because when Meghan's desperation spilled into the public eye, it wasn't just about ignored phone calls anymore. It was about a royal showdown that the entire world would soon witness. How do you think Queen Elizabeth felt watching all of this unfold? The ignored phone calls, the anger between brothers, the desperation of Meghan and the icy silence of Kate. Do you think she was surprised? Or do you think she had seen it all before, with different faces, different names, but the same royal patterns playing out again and again? Because here's the truth. Nothing in the monarchy happens without the Queen's shadow looming over it. Even when she said nothing, even when she appeared to stay out of the drama, her presence was everywhere. And in this feud over a tiara, Elizabeth's silent authority was perhaps the sharpest weapon of all. Let's rewind for a moment. The Queen's relationship with tiaras wasn't casual. To her, they weren't fashion. They were symbols of discipline, order, and hierarchy. She had worn them through war, through scandal, through endless scrutiny. Each jewel had a meaning. Each loan carried responsibility. When she granted a tiara, it was never just for glamour. It was a calculated decision about trust. And Meghan Markle? Elizabeth's instincts told her Meghan couldn't be trusted. That belief went back years, to the wedding, to Meghan's insistence on the emerald tiara that the Queen flatly denied. That moment wasn't just about preference. It was about authority. Elizabeth had watched Meghan push too hard, too fast. She had seen the sparks of entitlement. And from that day forward, she was wary. So when Meghan began hounding Kate, begging for another tiara, do you think the Queen was unaware? Of course not. Palace aides would have briefed her. Courtiers would have whispered the details. The Queen knew. And her silence wasn't neglect. It was judgment. Because sometimes silence from Elizabeth meant disapproval. Imagine Meghan's messages, her calls, her pleas, being quietly passed along the chain, until they reached the Queen's private secretary. Imagine that dignified shake of the head, that unspoken order, no, not her, not now. And here's the part that stings. Meghan believed she was fighting Kate. She believed she was up against William. But in truth, she was up against the crown itself. Against the one woman whose nod could have changed everything, and whose silence sealed her fate. Now, let's ask a dangerous question. Did the Queen deliberately let Meghan hang herself? Because by refusing to intervene, by allowing Kate to be the gatekeeper, Elizabeth didn't just say no. She let Meghan's desperation show itself. She let Meghan expose her own cracks, her own insecurities, her own obsession with legitimacy. And for the monarchy, that was valuable. Because it proved what they already feared, that Meghan was a liability. But let's flip the coin. Meghan's supporters would argue that the Queen's silence was cruelty, that she could have diffused the entire feud with a single gesture, loaning Meghan a tiara, showing kindness, granting her a piece of the legacy. They would say the Queen failed her duty to unify, that her silence was not wisdom, but neglect. Which side do you believe? Now, think about Kate in all of this. The Queen's silent backing gave her strength. Kate didn't need to shout. She didn't need to justify. She knew she had Elizabeth's quiet approval. And for Kate, that was everything. Because the Queen's trust wasn't given lightly. It was earned, over years of composure and service. Kate had it. Meghan didn't. And William? His fury wasn't just personal, it was inherited. He knew his grandmother's stance. He knew she expected him to defend the crown, to protect the jewels, to safeguard tradition. By stepping in against Meghan, William wasn't just defending Kate. He was fulfilling his grandmother's expectations. But Meghan saw the silence differently. She saw it as rejection, as exile, as proof that no matter how hard she tried, no matter how many calls she made, she would never be one of them. And that rejection hardened into something dangerous. Because when someone feels humiliated by silence, they don't always retreat. Sometimes they strike back. And that's exactly what Meghan prepared to do. She began talking, not just to Kate, not just to William, but to outsiders. Hollywood friends, media contacts, allies who would listen when the palace refused. She began hinting, planting seeds, preparing the ground for a new narrative. If the Queen wouldn't give her legitimacy, Meghan would take it another way, through the court of public opinion. But here's the twist. Meghan's timing couldn't have been worse. Because just as she was preparing to retaliate, whispers began circulating that she had already chosen a tiara, that she had already set her sights on one specific jewel, without permission. And when that rumor reached the Queen's ears, it wasn't just disapproval anymore. It was anger. Because to Elizabeth, that wasn't persistence. That was audacity. That was Meghan overstepping in a way no outsider should dare. And the Queen's response, though still silent to the public, carried weight within the palace. A single word behind closed doors. A single shake of the head. A signal that everyone understood. Meghan would not get what she wanted. Not now. Not ever. And that decision didn't just close the door on Meghan's tiara dream. It lit the fuse of her determination to fight back in a way no one in the palace expected. Because Meghan wasn't done. If she couldn't win the crown's approval, she would turn her fury on the crown itself. And the first casualty of that fury would be Harry, caught between the woman he loved and the family he couldn't abandon. What do you do when the two worlds you love most collide? And you can't save either? That was the prison Harry found himself trapped inside. On one side stood Meghan, the woman he had chosen against all odds, pleading with him, begging him to defend her, to fight for her right to stand equal. On the other side stood his family, his brother, his grandmother, his father, unyielding, unmoving, determined to protect the crown at any cost. And at the center of it all, a tiara. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? A glittering crown of diamonds splitting brothers apart, turning a family feud into a global scandal. But that's the cruel irony of monarchy. Symbols matter more than feelings. Objects hold more power than words. A tiara wasn't just a tiara. It was belonging. It was legitimacy. And for Harry, it became the spark that ignited a firestorm of loyalty, love, and betrayal. Picture Harry alone with Meghan after yet another clash with William. Meghan in tears, her voice sharp with frustration. Why won't they treat me the same? Why won't Kate let me have it? And Harry, shoulders heavy, heart divided, knowing he had no answer that would soothe her. Because deep down, he knew the truth. The family wasn't going to change. The crown wasn't going to bend. And Meghan would never accept that. Can you feel his torment? Harry had spent his entire life second to William. Second in line. Second in importance. Always the spare, never the heir. And now, in marriage, it was happening all over again. Kate, destined to be queen, showered with jewels and honors. Meghan, left waiting, ignored, denied. The cruel symmetry of it all wasn't lost on him. His wife's struggle mirrored his own lifelong resentment. And that's why it cut so deep. Because when Meghan begged for a tiara, Harry didn't just hear her words. He heard his own unspoken cries from childhood. Why does William get everything, while I'm left with nothing? That's why he defended her. That's why he sided with her against William, even when it tore their brotherhood apart. To protect Meghan was, in a way, to protect himself, the boy who had never been chosen. But here's where the pain becomes unbearable. Harry's loyalty to Meghan meant betrayal to William. Every time he stood by her, he drifted further from his brother. Every time he echoed her complaints, he dug the gulf deeper. And William noticed. Palace insiders describe shouting matches between the brothers during this time. William accusing Harry of being blinded. Harry accusing William of being cruel. Raised voices echoing through royal halls that had once carried their laughter as boys. The Tiara feud wasn't just about Meghan and Kate anymore. It was about the brothers themselves, two men forced to choose between blood and love. Now, ask yourself, what would you choose? Your partner or your family? Harry chose Meghan. Again and again, he chose her. But every choice left him more isolated, more despised, more divided from the only world he had ever known. And Meghan? She knew it. She leaned on it. She reminded Harry of his duty, not to the crown, not to his brother, but to her. You promised to protect me, she may have said. If you can't stand up to them, who will? The pressure was relentless. And Harry, already wounded by a lifetime of second-place treatment, couldn't bear to fail the one person who saw him as number one. But here's the tragedy. By choosing Meghan, he wasn't saving her. He was sinking with her. Because while Harry fought William, while he bristled at Charles's silence and the Queen's disapproval, the palace tightened its walls around Meghan. The more Harry defended her, the more the family saw her as a threat. And the more they saw her as a threat, the more Harry became one too. It was a vicious cycle. One night, Harry confronted William face to face. Imagine the scene. Two brothers, eye to eye, voices raised. William warning him, "She's damaging everything. She's dragging you down." Harry snapping back, "You're jealous. You've never accepted her. You never wanted her to belong." The air thick with rage, the kind of rage that only comes when love and betrayal are tangled beyond repair. And Kate? She watched in silence. Meghan? She fumed in frustration. The tiara that Meghan believed would unite her with the family had instead ripped the family apart. But it didn't stop there. Because Harry's torment didn't just live inside the palace walls. It spilled into every public move. Every cold glance between the brothers at events. Every stiff smile from Kate toward Meghan. Every whisper caught by cameras. The world saw it. The press devoured it. And Meghan's desperation, Harry's loyalty, William's fury, it all became headlines. Ask yourself again, who really won here? Meghan, who got Harry's loyalty but lost the crown's respect? William, who protected Kate but sacrificed his brother? Or Kate, who stood firm but found herself painted as cold? The truth is, no one won. And Harry, torn between two worlds, began to realize that. The tiara wasn't just a jewel anymore. It was a mirror reflecting the impossible choice before him. Family or love, crown or freedom, brother or wife. And when he finally chose, when he gave Meghan his full loyalty, the consequences would be irreversible. Because the next chapter of this feud wasn't about private calls or whispered resentments anymore. It was about secrets, messages, communications that were never meant to see the light of day. And when those messages surfaced, they wouldn't just humiliate Meghan. They would change the palace forever. What happens when words meant for one person end up in the hands of many? When private pleas turn into palace evidence? That's exactly what happened when Meghan Markle's desperation spilled onto the page. Messages, notes, emails that were never supposed to leave her control. But in a palace built on whispers and surveillance, secrets rarely stay secret for long. Think about it. When Kate Middleton stopped answering the phone, Meghan didn't give up. She pivoted. If Kate wouldn't listen to her voice, maybe she'd read her words. Maybe a carefully chosen sentence, a heartfelt note, could soften Kate's silence. Maybe written desperation would succeed where spoken desperation had failed. So Meghan wrote. She typed. She sent. Some were short, clipped, emotional. Please, just this once. Others were longer, layered with reasoning. Explaining why it mattered. Explaining why she deserved it. Framing it as fairness, not entitlement. But here's the problem. Every word she sent became proof. Proof of her persistence. Proof of her obsession. Proof of her desperation. And when those words reached Kate, they didn't soften her. They only hardened her resolve. Because Kate wasn't reading Meghan's notes as pleas. She was reading them as pressure, as manipulation, as an attempt to force her hand against her better judgment. And here's where it gets darker. Meghan didn't know her words weren't just stopping at Kate. No, some of those messages were being forwarded, passed along quietly, shared with William, shown to Palisades, perhaps even rising further, to Charles, maybe even the Queen herself. Imagine the sting of that. Meghan believed she was speaking privately. In reality, she was performing for the very court that despised her. Each sentence judged, each word dissected, each plea twisted into evidence that she was unfit. And the palace? They thrived on it. Insiders claimed Kate would forward the most desperate messages to William. A subtle gesture, a silent signal. Look at what she's doing. Look at how far she'll go. And William, already furious, saw each one as confirmation that Meghan was out of control. Now pause here. Ask yourself, did Meghan know? Did she realize her words were being weaponized? Or did she keep believing that persistence would break the wall? Because if she knew, her desperation becomes defiance, pushing forward even when she knew the palace was laughing behind her back. But if she didn't know, then her desperation becomes tragedy, pouring her soul into words that would only be used against her. And there's another layer. Some of those messages weren't just emotional. They carried undertones. Subtle threats, perhaps. If I can't wear it, the world will know why. Hints that Meghan could go public. That silence could backfire. That the monarchy couldn't ignore her forever. Those undertones terrified the palace. Because if there's one thing the royals fear, it's exposure. And Meghan's words, even in private, carried that dangerous edge. But here's the irony. Instead of intimidating the palace, those hints only pushed them further away. Every suggestion of going public only confirmed their belief that Meghan couldn't be trusted, that she was reckless, that she would burn the institution if she didn't get her way. So what did the palace do? They prepared. Quietly, carefully. They began building a wall not just around Kate, but around the entire crown. A wall designed to protect the jewels, the hierarchy, the image. And Meghan's messages became the bricks that justified it. Now imagine Meghan on the other side, sending note after note, waiting for a reply, believing silence was cruel indifference, never realizing that silence was strategy, that her words weren't falling into a void, but into files, folders, and whispered conversations that painted her as the enemy. Can you feel the isolation? The trap tightening? The realization that the more she pushed, the worse she looked? But Meghan didn't stop. She couldn't, because in her mind, stopping meant surrender. Stopping meant admitting that Kate had won, and Meghan wasn't ready to lose. Not yet. So she sent one final message. Longer, more emotional, more raw. A message that insiders claim was so intense, so desperate, that Kate didn't even respond. She simply passed it on, straight to William. And William, reading those words, knew it was time to escalate. He took the matter to his father, to Charles. And that changed the game. Because once the king-in-waiting got involved, Meghan wasn't just battling Kate anymore. She was battling the future of the monarchy itself. And Charles, though cautious, though reluctant, knew he couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. Because Meghan's words had reached too far. And his intervention would leave Meghan reeling, Harry torn apart, and the palace bracing for a storm that would shake every wall. What happens when the man who has spent his entire life waiting to be king decides to finally step into the storm? Charles had been cautious, careful, always lurking in the background while William and Kate built their image and Harry and Meghan burned their bridges. But when Meghan's desperate words landed in his lap, forwarded, highlighted, impossible to ignore, Charles knew the time for silence was over. Imagine the moment. Charles sitting in one of his offices, the soft tick of a clock in the background, aides shifting nervously as he reads Meghan's final message. Each line more frantic than the last. Each word dripping with desperation, frustration, perhaps even veiled threats. For Charles, it wasn't just a plea. It was a problem. A dangerous one. Because if Meghan truly was hinting at going public, if she was suggesting she might expose the palace's cold shoulder, it wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a potential crisis. A scandal that could tarnish the monarchy itself. And Charles couldn't allow that. Not with his own reign looming closer by the day. Not when the crown's survival depended on stability, order, and silence. So he acted. But here's the fascinating contradiction. Charles didn't storm into the situation with rage. He didn't shout or slam his fist on the table. That wasn't his style. Instead, he approached Meghan the way he approached every problem in his life, with caution, calculation, and a subtle edge of coldness. He called Harry first. Imagine Harry's phone buzzing, seeing his father's name, answering, heart pounding, knowing exactly what this was about. "Harry," Charles might have said in that measured tone, "we need to talk. About Meghan. About these messages." Harry, defensive immediately, insisting Meghan meant no harm, insisting she was misunderstood. But Charles, weary, cutting him off. "This cannot continue. She is overstepping. She is embarrassing herself. She is embarrassing you. And she is embarrassing us all." Can you feel Harry's fury rising? Torn between defending his wife and knowing his father held the power. Knowing Charles wasn't just speaking as a parent. He was speaking as the future king. But Charles didn't stop there. He demanded a family meeting. Picture the scene. A private room. Heavy drapes drawn. Charles at the head. William and Kate seated close. Harry with Meghan by his side. The air thick with tension. Every glance sharp. Every breath heavy. Charles begins, calm but unyielding. He speaks of tradition, of responsibility, of discipline. He reminds Meghan that tiaras are not playthings. They are heirlooms. Symbols of the monarchy's endurance. He tells her bluntly that her behavior, her calls, her messages, her persistence, is unbecoming of a duchess. That it cannot and will not be tolerated. And Meghan? She bristles. Her jaw tightens. She hears the words not as guidance, but as rejection. Not as advice, but as condemnation. She defends herself, insists she only wanted what was fair, that she was being singled out, treated as less. Her voice sharp, her words tumbling fast, trying to turn the room in her favor. But Charles doesn't waver. His face impassive, his tone clipped. It's not about fairness. It's about the crown. And the answer is no. Silence falls. Heavy. Crushing. Meghan's eyes flick to Harry, searching for support. Harry's fists clench, his loyalty torn raw again. William watches, stone-faced, his resentment toward his brother thick in the air. Kate sits calm, dignified, her silence more powerful than any words. And in that silence, the hierarchy is made clear. Charles isn't pleading. He isn't negotiating. He is commanding. And Meghan, for all her passion, for all her fire, realizes the truth. She has no power here. Not in this room. Not in this family. Not against the crown. But humiliation has a way of breeding rebellion. Because instead of breaking her, Charles's intervention hardened Meghan's resolve. If the family wouldn't let her in, she would expose them. If they wouldn't grant her legitimacy, she would create her own. And this time, she wouldn't just whisper about her pain. She would take it to the world. But Charles didn't know that yet. He thought his words had closed the matter. That by asserting his authority, by shutting Meghan down, he had ended the feud. He was wrong. Because Meghan walked out of that meeting seething. Her desperation now sharpened into anger. Her humiliation transformed into defiance. And Harry, torn though he was, walked beside her, choosing her. Again. And that choice would have consequences. Because Meghan wasn't going to stay quiet. She wasn't going to accept the crown's silence, or Charles's scolding, or Kate's cold rejection. She was going to strike back. And her first strike would be public. A move so bold, so shocking, that it left the palace scrambling to control the narrative. Because Meghan's private war over a tiara was about to explode onto the world stage, and no one was prepared for what she did next. What happens when a private war, once carefully hidden behind palace walls, erupts into the public eye? When Meghan Markle, cornered, humiliated, and rejected in private, decides she won't suffer in silence anymore. That was the moment everything changed. The tiara battle, once whispered about by courtiers and aides, spilled onto the world stage, and Meghan made sure the whole globe was watching. It didn't start with an official announcement. It never does. No, Meghan's first strike was subtler, crafted with the precision of someone who understood media. She knew how to drop hints, how to use silence as a weapon, how to make the public fill in the blanks. And so she began to craft her revenge not with a tiara on her head, but with carefully chosen words and calculated appearances. Think about her interviews. The way she would say just enough to spark curiosity, but never enough to be accused of direct attacks. A sigh, a pause, a cryptic phrase, Some women in the palace weren't very supportive. The public, already primed to see rivalry, connected the dots. Who could she mean? Who else but Kate? And then came the fashion statements. No tiara? Fine. Meghan found other ways to send messages. Bold jewelry. Outfits that screamed independence, defiance, even rebellion. At one event, she wore an accessory eerily similar to a royal piece she had once asked to borrow, as though to say, "If you won't give me your jewels, I'll make my own crown." The press went wild. Tabloids devoured it. Social media lit up with speculation. Was Meghan taking shots at Kate? Was this her way of exposing the icy silence behind the palace facade? But the real shock came when Meghan began opening up to people outside the palace. The kind of people who would never keep their mouths shut. Hollywood friends. Media confidants. Allies who thrived on scandal. Suddenly, whispers that had once been confined to Kensington corridors were appearing in glossy magazines and gossip columns. Stories about ignored calls. Stories about Meghan being denied jewels. Stories that painted her as a victim, locked out of a cold and unfeeling system. Ask yourself, coincidence or design? Because Meghan knew the palace's greatest weakness, its obsession with silence. They would never respond. They would never correct. They would never reveal the truth. And that meant Meghan could tell her version unchecked. But here's the contradiction. The more Meghan tried to control the narrative, the more it spiraled. Instead of elevating her, it exposed her. Instead of sympathy, many saw desperation. They saw a Duchess unable to let go of rejection, unable to accept no, lashing out in public because she had failed in private. And Kate? She remained silent. Silent, but radiant. Every time she stepped out in public, wearing jewels with effortless grace, her composure spoke louder than any interview Meghan could give. The contrast was brutal. Meghan's voice sharp, emotional, defensive. Kate's silence serene, unbothered, untouchable. Who do you think the public sided with? Now, let's look closer at Harry. Because as Meghan escalated publicly, Harry's torment deepened. Every headline about Meghan's victimhood widened the gulf with his brother. Every cryptic comment about palace cruelty hardened William's fury. And Charles, watching from above, grew colder. His intervention hadn't solved the problem. It had unleashed it. Inside the palace, aides were frantic. How much more would Meghan reveal? How far would she go? What if she exposed details of private conversations? What if she dragged the Queen's name into it? They scrambled to contain the damage, to limit Meghan's appearances, to distance the crown from her increasingly bold narrative. But the truth was out. The feud was no longer a family secret. It was entertainment, scandal, news. And Meghan? She wasn't finished. Her next move was bolder still. A high-profile appearance where she knew every camera would capture her. Meghan stepped out with a look carefully crafted to sting. Not a tiara, no, but a headpiece, a modern, sparkling band. That screamed defiance. It wasn't royal, but it didn't need to be. The symbolism was clear. I don't need your jewels. I'll make my own crown. The photographs exploded online. Commentators debated. Was it rebellion? Was it mockery? Was it Meghan declaring war on the very tradition that had denied her? And the palace? Silent, as always. But behind closed doors, the fury was palpable. William incandescent. Kate more resolved than ever. Charles weary, calculating. And the Queen, her disapproval silent but heavy, like a shadow looming over them all. But Meghan's gamble didn't end there. She hinted in private that more revelations could come. That if the palace didn't stop freezing her out, she had stories to tell. Stories the public would devour. And